Hey guys, how's it going? We are going to do a chapter summary or two here tonight. So let's see what we can get through. Chapter 3 summary right now for The Great Gatsby. This is the night of one of Gatsby's huge parties, and we actually get to meet Jay Gatsby and the Owl Eyed Man. Now, at the very beginning of the book, or very beginning of the chapter, I should say, sorry, um, Nick describes Gatsby's parties for us. I mean, these are these huge, just like grandiose affairs. I mean, people are coming in from the city. Caterers bring in all this great food. They've even got a bar with cocktails that have been mixed that some of the younger guests have probably never even seen or heard of. And the parties go literally all day and all night. They start out on the beach with people out on the diving docks, swimming in the bay, and running wakeboards up and down the shoreline. People suntanning on the beach, and then as the sun sets, people move the party to the house. And this quote on page 44: "The lights grow brighter as the earth lurches away from the sun, and now the orchestra is playing yellow cocktail music, and the opera of voices pitches a key higher. Laughter is easier minute by minute, spilled prodigality." I almost always mispronounce that word. Tipped out at a cheerful word. This is Nick describing these parties, and he wants us to know just how huge they are. I mean, they bring in crates of fruit, lemons and oranges especially, and they juice them in the kitchen, and then the peels get thrown out the next morning. They have a whole new crew of gardeners and craftsmen who come in and repair the damage from the parties the weekend before on Monday morning. These things are huge, and you don't get invited. People just show up to Gatsby's parties. Well, except for Nick. Nick actually gets invited to one of Gatsby's party. This is the invitation that we see in the movie version of The Great Gatsby. Now, this tells us something. Number one, Gatsby already knows who Nick is. Number two, he's been keeping his eye on Nick for quite some time. He knows that Nick lives right next door. Nick's never shown up, so he decides to extend a personal invitation. So Nick shows up at the party that night, and he realizes that he knows absolutely nobody at the party. So he makes up his mind that he is going to get rip-roaring drunk for only the second time in his life. The first time had happened the week before with Tom at Tom's little love shack. Now, this is where Nick starts to hear all sorts of rumors about Gatsby. That he was an American soldier in the war, that he was actually second cousin to Kaiser Wilhelm, the former leader of Germany, that he'd been a German spy during the war, heard that he killed a man once. I mean, he hears all sorts of rumors about Gatsby, and he doesn't know if any of them are true or not. He also hears from a woman who says that Gatsby replaced her dress. She tore it at one of his parties, and it's a $265 dress, and he just sent her a new one. You know, this tells us that Gatsby wants everybody to be happy. He wants everybody to have a good time. He wants people to keep coming back to his parties. Nick does run into one person that he knows. He meets Jordan Baker. And he decides he's going to hang out with Jordan that night, and Jordan tells Nick how much she really likes large parties. You know, she likes large parties because they're so intimate. Seems kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it? But then Nick and Jordan decide they're going to make an exploration of the mansion. And Nick and Jordan end up in the library. And that's where they meet this guy who's referred to as the Owl-Eyed Man. And he's referred to that way because he has kind of a large beak of a nose. His hair is kind of swept up to look like the horns of a horned owl. And he's got exceptionally thick glasses that make his eyes seem huge. He says that he's in the library, coming down off of a week-long drunk. And he says he's amazed the books are real. It's a triumph. What thoroughness, what realism. Knew when to stop, too. Didn't cut the pages. Fitzgerald, page 50. A lot of you probably won't get that reference. I want to show you something here. I'm just going to grab a random book off of the bookshelf here behind me. It happens to be a copy of The Great Gatsby. So if you look at the books, look at a book and the way that it is bound. You look down the edge of the page like this, you see it's perfectly cut. The lines are perfectly straight. That's not how books used to be. Let me see here. I don't have one over here behind me. I'm not going to go get up and go over to my other bookshelf. But if you look at older books, a lot of the edges of the pages are very jagged. And that's because of the way that books used to be put bound. They'd print them out on a giant roll of paper, and then they'd accordion that paper together, and they'd glue one edge, and then that goes into a paper cutter, and it cuts off the edges of that paper. Well, sometimes the paper cutter wasn't calibrated exactly right, and you'd miss a page. So one of the joys used to be that you'd take out your pocket knife, and you'd actually sit down with your book, and as you're reading your book, you'd come to pages that hadn't been cut. So you'd take your knife, you'd cut the page, and you'd keep reading. That was one of the joys of reading when people had more time to be able to do stuff like that. So if the books haven't been cut, or if the pages haven't been cut, that means a book's never been read. And if you're a book collector of any kind, that makes a book especially rare. You get a first edition of an old book that's never been read. Book collectors look for that kind of stuff. So, if the pages have never been cut in these books that the Owl-Eyed Man is looking at, it means they've never been read. Owl Eyes thinks Gatsby is just an illusion, that there is no Jay Gatsby. He's somebody that was made up, a persona that was, given this house to live in so that they could throw these big parties and get people out here on the weekends. He doesn't think that Gatsby is real, but he's doing something at this party that only Nick and Jordan are doing. He's actually making an effort to find out. Nobody else cares as long as the food is good and the music keeps playing and the booze keeps flowing. That's all they care about. So he thinks that Gatsby isn't a real person, and he's the only one here right now, besides Nick and Jordan, who's trying to find out who Gatsby really is. So Nick and Jordan come out of the library. They're rejoining the party. And Nick finally meets Gatsby. They sit down at a table with the guy, and this guy looks at Nick and says, "Don't I know you from somewhere? Weren't you in the war?" Nick says, "Well, yeah, I was part of this company." He's like, "Oh, I was part of this company, blah, blah, blah." And they start chatting it up, and Nick says, "I've been kind of looking for this guy, and I don't know where to find him." And the guy says, "Well, I'm afraid I'm a terrible host, and I apologize." Nick says, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, I'm Gatsby." And Nick looks at Jay Gatsby for the first time, and he looks at this man. He says, he smiled understandingly, much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance to it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. And he says, just at the moment that smile disappears, he's looking at this young roughneck just over the age of 30, and he says his language borders on the absurd because it seems like he's choosing his words very, very carefully. And Gatsby gets pulled away by a phone call and then pulls Jordan away as well. And so Nick is left by himself for the evening. He gets even more drunk than he already is. And he watches some of the people who are at this party. And just when he's getting ready to leave, Jordan comes back and says, "Oh my God, I just realized the most incredible secret. Oh, but I forgot, I can't tell you, I'm sorry. My number's in the book, you should call me," and she leaves. I hate it when people do that. But she has some big secret, and she says everything suddenly makes sense. Nick says, "I've given you the impression through these, the 3 nights that I've told you about that this is all my summer was." He says, "No, it was dinner at the Yale Club almost every night. I'd spend time walking through New York. I came to love the city." And then he catches back up with Jordan after a while and says he starts to feel a tender curiosity toward her. He's not in love, but he's starting to catch feelings. And he remembers where he had heard Jordan's name before. She was involved in a cheating scandal where she supposedly moved her ball, and the caddy saw it. And the caddy had said something to somebody, but then he recanted his story. The whole thing went away. He says, Jordan is incurably dishonest, but she can't be blamed for that. You can never blame a woman for being dishonest in this world. And Nick says he won't let himself catch feelings for Jordan right now because he's got a girl back home he's been sending letters to signed Love Nick. But near the end of the chapter, he also says that the one thing that he remembers the most about her is the thin film of perspiration that forms on her upper lip when she plays tennis. He says there's a promise there, an unspoken promise, and he can't, in good conscience, start hanging out with Jordan if he doesn't break things off with this other girl. At the end of the chapter, Nick says, everyone suspects himself of at least one of the cardinal virtues, and this is mine. I'm one of the few honest people I have ever known. So Nick has a very high opinion of himself here. He also, this is meant to emphasize just how different from Gatsby, from Tom, from Daisy, even from Jordan that Nick is. He's a Midwesterner at heart, and this city has not begun to corrupt him yet. So that's it for Chapter 3, guys. I will see you again for Chapter 4.